The words, spoken with the casual cruelty of a queen swatting a fly, hung in the pressurized air of the first-class cabin. "I'm sorry, but you'll have to move. This seat is taken." It wasn't a request. It was a decree. And in that moment, aboard Flight 818, from Washington Dulles to Geneva, the meticulously ordered world of Dr. Alani Carter began to fracture. She had spent the last 96 hours in a sealed, windowless government facility, surviving on stale coffee and the sheer adrenaline of scientific breakthrough. She had just successfully integrated the most advanced autonomous flight navigation system in history, a project codenamed Aura, into the Federal Aviation Network. She was exhausted down to her bones, a weariness so profound it felt like a physical weight. All she wanted was the 8 hours of uninterrupted silence she had paid a premium for in seat 2A. She had chosen it specifically, a window seat, just behind the bulkhead, with no one in front to recline into her space. It was her cocoon, her reward. But a woman was already in it. A woman who seemed to be sculpted from entitlement itself. She was in her late 60s, with a helmet of perfectly coiffed silver hair that wouldn't dare move in a hurricane. Her tweed suit was Chanel, her pearls were Mikimoto, and her expression was one of profound, unshakable certainty in her own importance. Her leather briefcase, embossed with the Senate seal, sat on the adjacent seat, 2B, a silent declaration of ownership over the entire row. Alani clutched the strap of her worn canvas messenger bag, the bag that held the hard drive with the final Aura diagnostic codes. She looked nothing like a titan of the aerospace industry. She was 28, wearing faded jeans, a simple black turtleneck, and a pair of scuffed boots. Her hair was pulled back in a simple, practical braid. She looked like a graduate student, not a woman whose intellect was currently safeguarding the lives of everyone on the plane and thousands more in the sky. "Excuse me," Alani said, her voice raspy from fatigue. "I think there's been a mistake. My boarding pass is for this seat, 2A. The woman, Eleanor Vance, didn't even bother to look at Alani's phone. She waved a dismissive hand, the diamonds on her ring catching the cabin light. The airline must have erred. They do that sometimes, especially with the discount fares. This is my seat. My husband always books it for me. Now, be a dear and find your actual seat. I'm sure it's further back." The final 2 words were laced with a venomous sweetness. Alani took a deep, steadying breath. She had briefed 4-star generals who were openly skeptical of her age and gender. She had stared down corporate executives trying to cut corners on her safety protocols. She could handle this. "Mum, I'm not on a discount fare. This is my assigned seat. Could you please check your boarding pass?" Eleanor Vance finally turned her head, her pale blue eyes sweeping over Alani in a cold, appraising glance that took in the worn jeans and the lack of designer labels. It was a look that dismissed Alani's entire existence in less than a second. "I don't need to check my pass. I know where I belong. The question is, do you?" The insult was as sharp and clear as a shard of glass. It wasn't just about the seat anymore. A young flight attendant named Maya, sensing the escalating tension, hurried over. Her smile was strained. "Is there a problem here, ladies?" "Yes," Eleanor said, her voice booming with authority. "This person is insisting on taking my seat. She seems confused. Please direct her to the economy cabin where she'll be more comfortable." Maya looked from Eleanor's imperious face to Alani's calm but resolute one. "Ma'am, could I see your boarding pass, please?" she asked Eleanor. "This is absurd," Eleanor huffed, though she grudgingly retrieved a ticket from her purse. "I am Mrs. Sterling Vance. My husband is Senator Vance, chairman of the Commerce, Science and Transportation Committee. I assure you, he will hear about this harassment." The name dropped into the cabin like a 10-ton weight. Other passengers who had been trying to mind their own business now openly stared. Senator Vance was a political institution, a man whose name opened doors and silenced dissent. Maya's face paled. She glanced at the ticket and then at her tablet. Her professional composure began to crumble. "Mrs. Vance," Maya said, her voice barely a whisper. "Your ticket is for seat 6D. This is 2A. This is Dr. Carter's seat." Alani noticed the flicker of recognition in Maya's eyes at the title, Doctor, but Eleanor saw only defiance. 6D? "That's impossible," Eleanor snapped. "My assistant must have made a mistake. Well, it doesn't matter. I'm here now. I have a bad back, you see. I need the legroom. This young woman is perfectly healthy. She can take 6D. It's a simple switch." "It's not a simple switch for me," Alani said, her voice quiet but firm. "I chose this seat for a reason, and I would like to sit in it. And I am not moving," Eleanor declared, crossing her arms and settling deeper into the plush leather. "So, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to physically remove the wife of a United States Senator?" "I think not." The cabin was now thick with a tense, uncomfortable silence. Maya looked utterly lost, a lamb caught between a wolf and a cliff. She pressed the call button for the purser, her hand trembling slightly. Alani stood her ground. She could feel the stares of the other passengers. She could see the judgment in some of their eyes, the assumption that she, the young black woman in jeans, was the one causing the problem. She felt a familiar, weary anger begin to bubble beneath her exhaustion. She had spent her entire life fighting to be seen, to have her work and her presence taken seriously in rooms dominated by people who looked like Eleanor Vance. She had earned this seat, not just with her money, but with her mind, with sleepless nights and relentless dedication. She was not giving it up. The purser, a stern, unflappable woman named Sarah, arrived. After Maya quickly explained the situation, Sarah addressed Eleanor with practiced diplomacy. "Mum, I understand there's been a mix-up, but federal aviation regulations require each passenger to be in their assigned seat for takeoff and landing. We need you to move to 6D. Eleanor laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Regulations? Don't talk to me about regulations. My husband writes them. Now, either you tell this girl to go away, or I will have your entire crew sanctioned for incompetence." "Look what you're doing!" Eleanor suddenly shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Alani. "You're upsetting me. My heart. You're putting an old woman's health at risk. Is this what your people do? Cause scenes?" The racial undertone was now an overtone, ugly and undeniable. A man in the row across spoke up. "Hey, that's enough. The flight attendant told you where your seat is. Just move." Eleanor whirled on him. "Mind your own business. This doesn't concern you." She then turned her fury back to Alani. "You don't belong in this cabin. You probably got this ticket through some diversity initiative, some handout. You haven't earned the right to be here." Alani's calm finally broke, not into anger, but into a chilling focus. The exhaustion fell away, replaced by the sharp, analytical precision that made her one of the best engineers in the world. She saw the problem, the variables, and the solution. She looked at Sarah, the purser. "The passenger is refusing a direct order from the flight crew. She is making baseless accusations and using discriminatory language. She is holding up the departure of this aircraft. I believe it is time to involve the captain." Sarah nodded grimly and headed for the cockpit. Eleanor scoffed. "Yes, call the captain. Perhaps a man will be able to talk some sense into this situation." She seemed to believe the pilot would be her natural ally, another authority figure who would recognize her status and put the upstart in her place. She had no idea of the catastrophic miscalculation she was making. The cockpit door opened and Captain Marcus Thorne emerged. He was a man in his late 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a face etched with the lines of 1,000 long-haul flights. He exuded a weary, no-nonsense authority. His eyes immediately took in the scene: the defiant Mrs. Vance in the wrong seat, the anxious crew, and the quiet, unmoving young woman in the aisle. "What's the delay?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that cut through the tension. "Captain," Sarah began, "this passenger, Mrs. Vance, is in seat 2A, which is assigned to Dr. Carter. Mrs. Vance has refused multiple requests from the crew to move to her assigned seat in 6D. Captain Thorne's gaze fell on Eleanor. He'd seen this drama 100 times. Entitled passengers thinking their frequent flyer status was a crown. His initial instinct was to de-escalate and get his plane in the air. He was already behind schedule due to air traffic control delays. "Ma'am," he said, his tone firm but neutral, "I'm Captain Thorne. I need you to move to your seat so we can get underway." Eleanor put on a pained, fragile expression. "Captain, thank heavens. This young woman is harassing me. I have a terrible back condition, and my doctor insists I have the extra legroom. I offered to switch, but she is being deliberately difficult. Surely we don't need to delay a whole flight for her stubbornness." Thorne glanced at Alani, expecting a protest. But Alani was silent. She simply met his gaze, her expression unreadable but intense. There was something in her eyes, a deep, unwavering intelligence, that gave him pause. He was about to suggest a compromise, perhaps offering Alani a voucher for her trouble, when his eyes caught a small detail. On the lapel of Alani's simple black turtleneck was a small, discreet pin. It was a silver stylized A with an orbital ring around it. Thorne's blood ran cold. He knew that pin. He had seen it just an hour ago in a mandatory pre-flight briefing. It was the logo for the Aura project. The briefing had been explicit. A lead engineer from the development team would be on board, monitoring the system's inaugural transatlantic run in a civilian aircraft. They were designated as essential personnel. Their assigned seat, 2A, had been specially outfitted with a secondary diagnostic data port concealed beneath a panel for real-time system monitoring. He looked back at the manifest on Sarah's tablet. Carter, a doctor. The note beside her name he'd overlooked now screamed at him. Essential flight personnel, Aura liaison. Do not relocate. This wasn't a passenger dispute. This was a critical safety and security issue. The woman in 2A wasn't just a traveler. She was part of the flight's operational system. Captain Thorne's entire demeanor shifted. The weary annoyance vanished, replaced by the sharp, decisive command of an Air Force veteran. The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop by 20 degrees. "Mrs. Vance," he said, and his voice was no longer accommodating. It was steel. "This conversation is over. You will gather your belongings and move to seat 6D immediately. That is a direct order from the captain of this aircraft." Eleanor was stunned by the sudden change in his tone. "How dare you speak to me like that? Do you know who I am? My husband? I don't care if your husband is the President of the United States," Thorne cut in, his voice dangerously low. "You are interfering with the duties of my flight crew and the safe operation of this aircraft. Your presence in that specific seat poses a security risk." "A security risk?" Eleanor shrieked with laughter. "Me? An old woman? That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. You're just taking her side because of some political correctness nonsense. Ma'am, you have 10 seconds to vacate the seat," Thorne said, ignoring her outburst. 10, 9. "You can't do this!" Eleanor cried, her face turning a blotchy red. "I'll have your license. I'll have this whole airline investigated for their shoddy planes and their incompetent staff." That was it. The final nail. Alani saw the captain's jaw tighten. "Sarah," Thorne said without looking away from Eleanor, "is the jet bridge still attached?" "Yes, Captain." "Good. Ground the flight." A collective gasp swept through the cabin. Eleanor Vance froze, her mouth agape. "What? What did you say?" "I have an unruly passenger who is refusing to comply with crew instructions and is compromising flight safety protocols," Captain Thorne announced, his voice now booming through the first-class cabin. "We are not leaving the gate. I am requesting Port Authority police to meet the aircraft. We will be removing a passenger." "You're grounding a whole plane?" "For her?" Eleanor whispered, pointing a shaking finger at Alani. The sheer, uncomprehending shock on her face was absolute. She had played what she thought was her trump card, her husband's name, and it had just detonated in her hand. Alani finally spoke, her voice calm and clear in the stunned silence. "He's not grounding the plane for me, Mrs. Vance. He's grounding it for you." Eleanor stared at her, utterly bewildered. "What are you talking about?" Alani allowed herself a small, cold smile. "My name is Dr. Alani Carter. I am the lead systems architect for the Aura navigation system. That's the software currently integrated into this Boeing 787's avionics. The software that is, for all intents and purposes, flying this plane. Seat 2A is not just a seat. It's my monitoring station. By refusing to leave, you weren't just stealing a seat. You were obstructing a key component of this aircraft safety system. That's a federal offense." The color drained from Eleanor Vance's face. The Chanel suit, the pearls, the air of supreme confidence. It all dissolved in an instant, leaving behind a terrified, confused old woman who had just realized she was not the most important person in the room. Outside the window, the flashing blue and red lights of an airport police vehicle began to strobe against the rainy tarmac, each pulse a beacon marking the spectacular end of her world. The silence in the cabin was now absolute, broken only by the distant wail of approaching sirens. Sergeant Frank Miller of the Port Authority Police Department was a man built like a vending machine, with a mustache that had seen 3 decades of airport drama. He stepped onto the aircraft, his eyes quickly assessing the scene. The steely-faced captain, the anxious flight attendants, the gawking passengers, and the silver-haired woman in the expensive suit who looked like she'd just seen a ghost. "Captain Thorne?" Miller asked, his voice a gravelly baritone. "Sergeant," Thorne acknowledged with a nod. "We have a passenger, Miss Eleanor Vance, who has refused to comply with crew instructions, interfered with flight operations, and compromised a security protocol. We need her removed from the aircraft." Eleanor shot to her feet, her composure returning in a wave of panicked indignation. "Officer, thank God you're here. This is a complete misunderstanding. This captain is on a power trip, and this woman," she gestured wildly at Alani, "assaulted me. She tried to steal my seat." Sergeant Miller's gaze shifted to Alani, who stood quietly by the galley, her expression neutral. He'd heard the "she stole my seat" line 1,000 times. It was never the full story. He looked back at Eleanor. "Ma'am, are you Eleanor Vance?" "Yes, and I demand you arrest this woman for harassment." Miller ignored her demand. "Mrs. Vance, I've been authorized by the captain of this aircraft to remove you. Please come with me peacefully." He took a step toward her. "No!" she shrieked, shrinking back into the seat as if it were a throne she had to defend. "You can't touch me. I am the wife of Senator Sterling Vance. Call him. He will straighten this out." "Ma'am, your husband's position has no bearing on FAA regulations," Miller said, his patience wearing thin. He gestured to his 2 younger officers. "Let's go." As the officers moved forward, Eleanor did something that sealed her fate. In a fit of pure, unadulterated rage, she swung her heavy, Senate-embossed briefcase off the neighboring seat and hurled it at the approaching officers. It wasn't a wild swing. It was a deliberate, furious act. The briefcase, weighted down with files and a laptop, struck the younger officer in the shoulder, making him grunt and stumble back. The atmosphere in the cabin instantly changed from tense to critical. "That's it," Miller barked. "Assaulting an officer. Cuffs." Before Eleanor could even process what she had done, the officers were on her. They were professional, efficient, and showed no deference to her tweed suit. One officer grabbed her right arm, the other her left. She let out a piercing scream as they pulled her from the seat she had fought so desperately to keep. "Get your hands off of me, you brutes! Police brutality! I'll have your jobs!" she screeched, thrashing wildly. Her perfectly coiffed hair came undone, strands falling across her face. Her shoe came off. The image of effortless power she had cultivated her entire life was being stripped away, layer by layer, in front of a captive audience with dozens of cell phone cameras rolling. They dragged her down the aisle, her protests echoing through the plane. As they passed Alani, Eleanor dug her heels in, forcing a momentary stop. Her face was contorted with a venomous hatred. "You," she hissed, her voice a ragged whisper. "You did this. You with your quiet little act. You will regret this. I will spend every last dollar I have to ruin you. You'll be a nobody again. You'll be nothing." Alani looked at the unraveling woman. There was no triumph in her eyes, only a profound sadness. "You did this to yourself, Mrs. Vance," she said softly. "All you had to do was move to seat 60. The simplicity of the statement seemed to enrage Eleanor even more. She opened her mouth to scream again, but the officers pulled her forward, hauling her up the jet bridge. Her final, fading cry was her husband's name. "Sterling! Call Sterling!" The moment the aircraft door closed, sealing off the drama, the cabin erupted. Not in applause, but in a collective, relieved exhale, followed by a buzz of excited chatter. Captain Thorne's voice came over the intercom, calm and steady once more. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the significant delay. We are coordinating with the tower for a new departure slot. In the meantime, all drinks in all cabins are complimentary for the duration of the flight to Geneva. Thank you for your patience." A cheer went up. The tension broke, replaced by the giddy energy of a shared, unbelievable experience. Alani finally sank into seat 2A. The leather was still warm from its previous, unwilling occupant. Maya, the young flight attendant, approached her, her eyes wide with awe. "Dr. Carter," she whispered, offering a bottle of water. "I am so sorry you had to go through that." "It wasn't your fault, Maya," Alani said, giving her a tired but genuine smile. "You did everything right." As the plane finally pushed back from the gate, Alani leaned her head against the cool glass of the window. She should have felt victorious, but she just felt weary. She had won the battle for her seat, but she knew, with a sinking certainty, that Eleanor Vance's threat was not idle. A war with a man like Senator Sterling Vance was not something you won so easily. She pulled out her encrypted work phone and sent a single, concise text to her director at the Department of Defense. "Incident on AA-818. Passenger removed. Political complications likely. Stand by." The reply was instantaneous. "We're already tracking it. Legal is engaged. Focus on the mission, Doctor. We have your back." Alani closed her eyes as the engines roared to life. The mission. She had to focus on the mission. But as the plane climbed into the dark, rain-swept sky, She couldn't shake the feeling that the turbulence was just beginning. While Alani Carter was monitoring the flawless performance of her aura system at 38,000 feet, the storm she had left behind was making landfall in Washington, D.C. The internet moves faster than a Boeing 787. By the time Flight 818 was over the Atlantic, videos of the Senate Karen incident, filmed from half a dozen angles, were the #1 trending topic worldwide. The footage was damning. It showed Eleanor Vance's sneering condescension, her racist and classist remarks, her refusal to obey the crew, and the final, undeniable act of her throwing a briefcase at a police officer. The narrative was clear, brutal, and viral. In his stately office in the Russell Senate Office Building, Senator Sterling Vance watched the video on his aide's laptop, his face a mask of cold fury. At 72, Vance was a relic of an older, more powerful Washington. He was a man who believed in backroom deals, quiet influence, and the ironclad rule that men like him were above public scrutiny. His wife's very public, very vulgar meltdown was a direct assault on that belief. "Kill it," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. His young, ambitious chief of staff, a man named Thompson, looked uncomfortable. "Sir, we can't. It's everywhere. It has over 50 million views. The networks have picked it up." "Then spin it!" Vance slammed his fist on his mahogany desk. "My wife is a respected philanthropist, a pillar of the community. She had a medical episode, exhaustion, dehydration. Blame the airline's aggressive staff for provoking an elderly woman in a fragile state." "We're trying, Senator," Thompson said, sweating under his boss's glare. "We've released a statement to that effect. But the video, she seems very lucid when she's calling the other passenger a diversity hire." The senator's face turned a deep, dangerous shade of crimson. The calls were already coming in. From the Senate Majority Leader, from the party chairman, from major donors who did not appreciate being associated with a viral racist spectacle. His carefully constructed world of power and prestige was being threatened by his wife's 5-minute tirade over a plane seat. His first move was to try and crush Alani Carter. He put his top investigator on it, a ruthless ex-FBI agent named Cutler. "Find out who this woman is," Vance commanded. "I want to know where she works, who she knows, every skeleton in her closet. We're going to paint her as an activist, an agitator who provoked my wife for a payday." Cutler reported back within hours, and the news was not what the senator wanted to hear. "Sir," Cutler said over the phone, his voice grim, "this isn't going to work. The woman isn't an activist. She's Dr. Alani Carter." "A doctor of what? Grievance studies?" Vance sneered. "No, sir. A PhD in aerospace engineering and computational physics from MIT. She's the lead architect of the Pentagon's new Aura navigation system. She's not just some passenger. She's considered critical national security infrastructure. Her work is classified at levels I can't even access. Messing with her is like poking the Department of Defense with a sharp stick." Senator Vance was silent for a long moment. This was a complication he hadn't anticipated. The woman wasn't a civilian he could bully into silence. She was a protected asset of the very government he was a part of. Meanwhile, the consequences for his wife were immediate and severe. Eleanor was charged with 2 federal offenses: interference with a flight crew and assaulting a federal officer. Due to the senator's public statement about her fragile health, the judge denied bail, citing her as a flight risk. The sterile, soundproofed walls of the U.S. Embassy's secure briefing room in Geneva felt more confining than the windowless facility she had just left 96 hours prior. For 2 days, Alani's world had been a series of hushed conversations with faceless legal attachés and the disembodied, pixelated face of her director, General Peters, on a heavily encrypted video feed. She was no longer Dr. Alani Carter, lead architect. She was now a data point in an international incident, her every word recorded, transcribed, and analyzed. The world outside these beige walls was apparently on fire with her story, but inside there was only the cold, clinical process of containment. "The senator is not backing down, Alani." General Peters's voice crackled from the speaker. His face was a mask of grim professionalism. "His PR team is working overtime, painting you as a provocateur, an activist who targeted his wife for a viral moment. They are digging, and they are ruthless." Alani stared at her own reflection in the dark screen. She saw the exhaustion etched around her eyes, a weariness that had settled deep into her bones. "General, I wasn't an activist. I was a passenger trying to get to my assigned seat. A seat, I might add, that was designated as a mission-critical monitoring station. I know that. We know that," Peters assured her. "But the truth is a slow-moving freighter in a sea of high-speed misinformation. Just stick to the facts. The video evidence is our anchor. Captain Thorne's testimony will be our engine. For now, your job is to finish the Aura integration briefings with the ESA. Do not engage with any media. Do not post on any platform. You are, for all intents and purposes, a ghost. Understood?" "Understood, General," she said, the words tasting like ash. A ghost, that's what she felt like. A phantom watching a drama about her own life unfold from a great, sterile distance. The next 6 months were a masterclass in bifurcation. In her professional life, Alani was ascendant. The Aura system, its successful maiden voyage, now a matter of public record thanks to the incident, was hailed as a triumph. She led teams, briefed international aviation consortiums, and dove deeper into the elegant complexities of predictive flight modeling. Her work was a sanctuary of pure logic, a world of clean data and predictable outcomes, a stark contrast to the messy, chaotic narrative that had attached itself to her name. In her personal life, she was a meme, a symbol, a reluctant icon. There were gifs of her calm, unblinking stare. There were think pieces dissecting her quiet resistance as a paradigm of modern protest. She was lauded on talk shows she never watched and celebrated in articles she never read. Well-meaning strangers would stop her in airports, their eyes wide with recognition. "You're her, the woman from the plane. Thank you for what you did," they'd say. She would offer a polite, tight-lipped smile, a flicker of the ghost General Peters had ordered her to be, and hurry away. They didn't understand. She hadn't done it for them. She hadn't done it for a cause. She had done it because a variable, Eleanor Vance, was in the wrong place, creating an unacceptable level of systemic instability. She had addressed the problem with the same dispassionate logic she would apply to a flawed line of code. The world's interpretation of her actions felt like a gross misreading of the data, a corruption of the source file. The praise felt as unearned and misplaced as the vitriol that flooded the darker corners of the internet, where she was painted as a villain, a race baiter, a fraud. Both narratives were noise, obscuring the simple, clean signal of the truth. She had a job to do, and a woman was in her way. The Vances, meanwhile, were not just facing a storm, they were at the heart of a hurricane of their own making. Senator Sterling Vance's desperate press conference, where he sacrificed his wife to save his career, had backfired spectacularly. It was seen not as a moment of painful honesty, but as the cowardly, calculated act of a man severing a limb to escape a trap. His attempt to paint Eleanor as mentally unstable was undermined by dozens of reports from former staffers and charity board members who described her as not unstable, but consistently and venomously entitled. The Senate Ethics Committee, while finding no smoking gun of outright corruption, released a damning report on a culture of casual entitlement within the senator's office, detailing years of his staff using his name to bully, cajole, and demand special treatment. His political life was dying the slow death of 1,000 cuts. Stripped of his chairmanship and facing a primary challenger who ran ads featuring looped footage of his wife's meltdown, he announced his retirement, a titan of Washington, brought low not by a grand conspiracy, but by a squabble over legroom. Eleanor's fate was quieter, and somehow more profound in its desolation. The legal proceedings stripped her of her dignity. The divorce stripped her of her name and fortune, and the court-mandated psychiatric evaluation stripped her of her last defense, the belief in her own sanity. In a sterile, white room, a court-appointed therapist asked her a simple question. "Who are you, Eleanor, without the title of Mrs. Vance?" The question had hung in the air, a terrifying void. She had no answer. For 68 years, her identity had been a reflection of her husband's power. Without it, she looked in the mirror and saw a stranger, a frightened, bitter old woman with thinning hair and rage in her eyes. Her punishment was not the community service she was ordered to perform at a local food bank, where she moved canned goods with a sullen, resentful fury. Her true punishment was the deafening silence of her new life in a small Florida condo, a silence filled only with the memory of a world that no longer recognized her, a world that had moved on without her. She had spent a lifetime believing she was the center of the universe, only to discover she was a minor celestial body whose light was entirely reflected, and whose star had gone out. It was a crisp autumn evening, when Alani found herself sitting in a vinyl booth at a 24-hour diner near Baltimore Washington International Airport. The air smelled of stale coffee and bacon grease. Across from her sat Captain Marcus Thorne. He had reached out to her through the airline's legal department with a simple, one-line email. "I think we have some debriefing of our own to do, if you're willing." He looked different out of uniform, softer. He wore a worn flannel shirt and jeans, the lines of authority around his eyes replaced by a quiet, settled weariness. He had retired 2 months ago, a quiet departure after 40 years of service. "I wanted to thank you, Doctor," he said, his voice a low rumble that was still capable of commanding a cabin. "And to apologize." Alani frowned. "Apologize? For what? You saved the situation." He shook his head, stirring his coffee with a small metal spoon. "I apologize for the fact that it had to be a situation at all. I've seen people like her my whole career. Little tyrants in their own little airborne kingdoms. Usually you can de-escalate. But she was different. She wasn't just breaking a rule. She was trying to break a reality, the one where she wasn't the most important person in the room." He looked up from his cup, his gaze direct and piercing. "I also wanted to apologize because I almost didn't see it. For a second there, she was just another delay, another entitled passenger. I was tired, we were behind schedule, and I almost asked you to compromise, to take the voucher, move to another seat. It was the pin that snapped me out of it. Your aura pin." Alani felt a chill, the thought of what could have happened. Not a crash. Aura was more robust than that, but the precedent it would have set. The quiet, insidious victory of entitlement over expertise. "We all have moments of fatigue," Alani said softly. "It's about correcting the course when you see the error." "That's what flying is," he agreed with a small smile. "A million tiny corrections to stay on course." He leaned forward slightly. "The thing is, Dr. Carter," "Alani, what you did in that moment, just standing there, holding your ground, not raising your voice. That took a kind of courage I don't see very often. It's easy to be brave when you're shouting. It's a hell of a lot harder when you're quiet. I wasn't trying to be brave, she confessed, the words feeling truer here in this anonymous diner than they ever had in a legal deposition. I was just calculating. The cost of giving up that seat felt higher than the cost of the confrontation. Not just for me. For the principle of the thing. It felt like a stress fracture. A small, insignificant crack, but one that could propagate through the entire structure if you ignored it. Thorne nodded slowly, understanding her language of systems and failures completely. The integrity of the airframe, he murmured. He reached into his jacket pocket and placed a small, worn object on the table between them. It was a pair of old, silver-toned pilot's wings, the kind given out after a first solo flight. They were scratched and tarnished with age. My father's, he said. He flew B-17s in the war. He told me that these weren't a symbol of power. They were a symbol of responsibility. A reminder that you're in charge of the system and that you are responsible for its integrity, no matter who's on board. He pushed them gently across the table toward her. I think you understand that better than anyone. Alani looked at the wings, then back at his face. For the first time since the ordeal began, she felt a crack in her own cool, analytical facade. A wave of emotion, unexpected and overwhelming, washed over her. It wasn't triumph. It was recognition, a deep, profound sense of being seen not as a symbol, not as a meme, but as a fellow professional who had simply and resolutely done her job. She picked up the wings, their weight feeling solid and real in her palm. I can't accept these, she whispered. You're not accepting them, he said, his voice gentle. I'm asking you to hold on to them, as a reminder that for every Eleanor Vance in the world, there are people who still believe in the integrity of the system, people who will have your back when you make the right call. 1 year to the day after Flight 818, Alani Carter was at Washington Dulles again, waiting to board a flight to Seattle for a new project. The past year had been one of transformation. She had accepted her new reality, learning to filter out the noise of her public persona and focus on the signal of her work. She had established a small foundation, funded by a speaking engagement she had reluctantly accepted, to provide scholarships for young women in STEM, turning her unwanted fame into something tangible and useful. She walked down the jet bridge, her canvas messenger bag, the same one from that day, slung over her shoulder. She found her row and stopped. Seat 2A, a window seat just behind the bulkhead. The airline now reserved it for her on every flight, a quiet, permanent acknowledgement. She slid into the seat. It was no longer just a space. It was a territory she had defended and defined. It felt different now. Not like a prize, but like a responsibility. She stowed her bag, the old pilot's wings tucked safely in an inner pocket, their cool metal a faint pressure against her side. As the other passengers boarded, a young flight attendant, not Maya, but one with the same earnest, slightly nervous energy, paused by her row. Dr. Carter, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I just wanted to say thank you. We all saw the video. You changed things for us. You gave us our authority back. Alani looked up at the young woman and offered a genuine, warm smile, free of the tightness it had held for months. You always had the authority, she said. Sometimes you just need to be reminded of the integrity of the system you command. The flight attendant nodded, her eyes shining, and continued down the aisle. Alani turned to the window, her reflection a faint silhouette against the bustling tarmac. She pulled out her laptop, the familiar glow of the screen a comforting welcome. She wasn't a hero, she wasn't a victim. She was an engineer, and she had work to do. As the plane began to push back, she felt the familiar, powerful rumble of the engines spooling up. It was the sound of a complex system working in perfect harmony, a symphony of human ingenuity and physical law. She had fought not for a seat, but for her place within that system. She had held the line, and as the aircraft lifted gracefully into the vast, open sky, leaving the noise and the chaos of the world far below, Alani Carter felt, for the first time in a very long time, perfectly and completely on course.